Chapter 5. After trying everything he could think of to get out of the museum, Dominic walked up the still escalator steps to the second floor. He shone his light up to a huge black and white photograph of an immigrant family that hung on the wall. Dominic stopped to read the words below it. An Irish family arriving at Ellis Island, 1911, was all the caption said. Dominic studied the picture. There was a mother, a father, and 9 children. He counted them. To his surprise, he realized that they were all boys. At least 8 of them were, for he wasn't so sure about the baby in the mother's arms. Even so, 8 brothers, he whistled aloud. Dominic had always dreamed of having a brother, but having 8 would be like winning the lottery. He stared up at the photograph and imagined himself standing in the long line of fair-haired boys. Soon, Dominic walked from photo to photo, trying on one family after another. He saw himself surrounded with Chinese brothers and sisters in one picture, leaning against a tall Russian father in another, and in the arms of a smiling gypsy mother in yet another. He spent a long time roaming the hallways and rooms, seeking out faces, imagining himself happily fitting in, a single spoke in a large wheel of a real family. His favorite picture was of an Italian family. There was a boy with a cap on his head and a sack over his shoulder. Beside the boy stood a little girl and a mother with a baby in her arms. Dominic thought the boy looked like him with his dark hair and eyes. He spent a long time in front of the picture, not only imagining himself a part of this family, but imagining that this boy was somehow really his Italian ancestor. He realized this was a once-in-a-million chance, but he couldn't stop thinking, what if? After Dominic had stared at the picture for a long time, he decided to go upstairs to the 3rd floor and see what there might be to do up there. But as he started to climb the now motionless escalator, a low, mechanical groan suddenly arose from the silent steps, and he jumped off. Then, just as suddenly as it had started up, the noise stopped. Everything was quiet again, a deadly quiet that chilled Dominic to the bone. Dazed with fear, he stumbled about the room and bumped into a display case, which caused him to scream out loud. The unexpected noise had shaken his nerves so badly that his teeth had begun to chatter. What was going on, he wondered? Was someone there? Were they watching him and trying to frighten him? Crouching under a display stand of telephones, Dominic squeezed his eyes shut tight and willed his teeth to stop chattering. He sat perfectly still, like a hunted animal, hiding, waiting, and listening. But the low hum of the air conditioning was the only sound to fill the room. Dominic stayed that way for what seemed like hours, frozen with fear, until he felt his legs began to cramp. Slowly, cautiously, he moved out from under the table and finally stood up. Then, without thinking, he reached out and picked up one of the telephone receivers on display in front of him. An old Norwegian man talked about his homeland. Dominic was filled with such relief that he let out a loud sigh. It was the first human voice he had heard all night, and even though he knew it was only a tape, the sound of the old man was somehow comforting. As he went from one telephone to another, Dominic's fear slipped away, and he began to pretend that he was actually having conversations with the voices. They were mostly old people, grandmothers and grandfathers, he guessed. He pretended they were his. Soon he began to feel less lonely. But the voices never answered him, and after a long while he began to long to talk to someone real, someone who would answer his questions and listen to what he had to say, like a real grandmother or a grandfather would have. Dominic's hand reached for the last phone on the stand when the flashlight went dead. Suddenly, he was in total darkness. Frantically, he tapped the flashlight against the table and turned the switch on and off, but it was no use. It wouldn't light up. He dropped it down onto the display stand. Desperately frightened, Dominic stood trembling in the blackness. His hand searched under his t-shirt until his fingers felt the familiar, smooth curves of his lucky key. What was he supposed to do now? Where could he go? What if someone was out there, watching him, waiting for him? Dominic reached down for the useless flashlight, thinking to carry it as a weapon if he had to, but his hand fell over the phone receiver instead. It was the last phone on the stand, the one that he was about to pick up before the flashlight died. He brought the receiver to his ear and heard a kindly old voice begin to speak. I came to America when I was a boy of 8 years old. I'm all alone, Dominic blurted out, and nobody cares. Nobody even came to look for me. In Italy, we had very little, and yet we had so much. I don't know what to do. Dominic's voice was choked with sobs. The flashlight is broken, and it's so dark. I'm afraid. I'm afraid. My brothers and I all shared one pair of shoes. We had to take turns wearing them. Mr. Howard forgot me, and maybe my foster family forgot me too. In Italy, we had a goat. Oh, please, it's so dark and I'm so afraid, Dominic pleaded. Please listen to me. There was a long pause on the other end. Then, as he stood all alone in the darkness, Dominic Cantori heard the old voice whisper, Yes, little one, I'm listening.